freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it. Right! You tell them I'm coming! And hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio! The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Good evening, folks. This is Diamond with the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, bringing you another edition of the Inconvenient Truth, prepping for the grand solar minimum. Joining us tonight is one of our favorite guests, Lee Wheelbarger. He's a military electronics expert. He's a Renaissance man. He works on the Solar Blue Yacht Project and a bunch of other insane stuff. But the most important stuff that Lee knows is plasma physics, and that's why we have him on the show tonight, because tonight's episode is called Ask Lee, where our viewers on our YouTube channel sent us questions for Lee Wheelbarger, and some are for me, or both of us. I guess we can give our opinions on these. And we have a whole bunch of questions. We have more questions than we'll probably get to. And Lee, he's been hard to find because he just revealed to me he was on his honeymoon the other day when I reached out to him. Lee, is that true?
Yes, sir, it is. Christine and I got married in Cass, West Virginia on June the 9th.
Well, congratulations, my friend. How are you still on the honeymoon?
No, just got back. So.
Oh, well, that's a bummer. Well, maybe we can bring you up on the show tonight.
Well, we were on the honeymoon before. It was kind of a honeymoon before vacation, marriage in, and honeymoon thereafter, and coming back. So we've got a lot more fun planned. Oh, well, that's good. So did you took a look at, you saw all the questions that came in. I've been posting them to your Skype for the last 2 days, and there are lots of questions. So do you have anything to say before we dive in? Well, I did want to, I always try to give out a tidbit as far as a redneck trick. So I want to make sure I get that out of the way before all the questions. So a big problem that a lot of people have is mosquitoes. So you can
we got mosquito problems here, Lee.
Yes. So if you take a square box fan, preferably a metal one, and you place it outside, and on the intake side of the fan, that's the side that the air is sucked into, if you put like a screen over that, like in a screened-in porch, you can hold it on with magnets, and then you put that up about 5 feet in the air so as that it's blowing air towards the area that you want to congregate, like on a patio or a porch or what have you. And then if you come out from that light, from the fan itself, on the intake side, so the air's blowing towards the house or the structure or wherever you're gathering, on the opposite side of that, take a 25-watt black light and place that about 2 or 3 feet out on the other side of that fan. Because what will happen is the mosquitoes will smell the CO2 coming from you, and then they will look for a heat source. And because they like you and can see UV, and you're creating a UV light, they can see that light and they'll be attracted to it. Also, that's a heat signature. And so because the heat sensing or heat seeing capability of a mosquito is fairly low resolution, we're talking like 200 lines of resolution if it were a TV compared to what we see, a light bulb simulates a bald head real well. And so the mosquito will be attracted to it. And because the mosquito can only fly at about 1.5 miles an hour, when it flies near that light bulb, because the airflow past the light bulb is faster than 1.5 miles an hour, it'll suck the mosquito into the screen, and it'll hold all of them there until you get the fan off. And so once the screen is full of mosquitoes, you just squirt it with denatured alcohol in a little squeeze bottle. You can mix it 50-50 alcohol water. That'll kill all the mosquitoes. You shake them on the ground, and that way when the birds eat them or the frogs or whatever else eats them, it won't make them sick. So it's environmentally friendly. It'll kill thousands upon thousands of mosquitoes. You'll be absolutely amazed. And just make sure you use a black light in a lamp, probably about 2 feet from the intake side. So that's Lee's redneck trick for mosquito elimination.
Sounds delicious. Why don't we collect them and fry them up? They're probably not that good.
Yeah, I'm not big on the blood types.
No, there's probably disease in there. Well, Lee, that's an amazing redneck tip, and I'm sure the listeners appreciate it. I can see it in action right now and just almost clogging up the screen, so you probably want to get a nice tight one.
Yeah, we'll just change it often.
Yeah, that's an amazing tip. I appreciate that. So let's jump into the questions, Lee. The first one is the only question that I don't have the actual viewer's name who gave it to us. I know it's a female, and she's a regular listener to the YouTube channel. So it says, Dear Lee, given the excessive population of our suffering globe, clearly not everyone is going to be able to survive and thrive in the future. Do you see a slow, gradual reduction of the human population? Or do you think food shortages likely will be so severe that mass violence and starvation leading to civilization's collapse will occur rapidly that direction? In other words, what do you think is going to happen? Is it quick, or is it the food shortages that cause unrest, Lee?
It will be food shortages and unrest, and it will happen quickly if we use history as a guide. If you look at the millions that died in Scotland, the millions that died in France, the Great Potato Famine, if you look back in history at all of these events, there is mass starvation over a few number of years. So you'll lose millions per country or continent per year in the regions that are affected by the cold climate.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's not just, it's driven by the food shortages, but also lack of nutrition, sickness, you have disease. So there's a whole plethora of different effects from those food shortages. And the reality is that in regions where the food supply is short, it takes a long time to resupply that. So if it takes a year, large percentages will die.
Absolutely.
Okay, second question. This is coming from Matt P. Dear Lee, do you believe governmental indifference towards basic infrastructure necessities like the drinking water in Flint, Michigan, the decaying dams across the U.S., the bridges, the roads, do you think that that's evidence of a confidential foreknowledge of the impending grand solar minimum and the effects?
No. I think that is poor government action towards the populations of those regions, and that is all politically driven locally by the local and the state governments. I don't think the overall, as a whole, U.S. government has a clandestine plan to say, oh yeah, let's make our infrastructure go to hell when we really need it at its most. And I think the things that Trump is doing as far as bringing the economy back will be beneficial to the U.S. In the coming cold era.
Yeah, because he's a businessman, and you make money building roads and infrastructure. Those are billion-dollar projects, and what you get as a result when you invest in that is really good traffic flow and people wanting to be in those areas. So I tend to agree with you, Lee. I don't think there's a government conspiracy that they're just not, fixing the bridges, and et cetera, because they know it's all going to be destroyed. I think that they know it costs a lot of money, and they're spending money elsewhere currently. But if you have a new model where you use more of a business model, you don't have to spend any money on this infrastructure, so to speak, if you make a good plan. Now, Matt P. has a little extra piece to his question, and it's, do you think that the global 5G network installation has anything to do with mind control?
No.
Simply better cell phone service?
Yeah. Very familiar with 5G, and I actually designed an antenna for 5G.
Okay, and it's not in a frequency range that could affect human neural pathways or neural systems?
No, the human body's neural pathways work at a very, very low frequency. We're in the hertz, not gigahertz.
Excellent. I'm sure many listening won't believe us, but I agree with you. Now, Lee, let's move on to the next question. Gay Sims says, Dear Lee, can you tell me why governments do not believe in global cooling at all? I find their ignorance unbelievable, and they should at least be considering it based on the historical information. Why do they not recognize the patterns of past climate records? That's what I want to know. It's my question, too.
It depends on which government you're talking about. So
yeah,
the U.S. government isn't talking about it publicly, but the Russian government, the Indian government, Pakistani government, and other governments around the world do talk about grand solar minimum. In fact, if you type in on Google grand solar minimum government, you will actually see research that is being done by different universities, so on and so forth. Some of them in the UK, which I was actually just reviewing a paper written by a group in the UK about the effects on the planet of a grand solar minimum, the uprising that it will cause, food shortages, and so on and so forth. So more governments are coming online and revealing their knowledge of what's transpiring. It's really hard to go from global warming, we're all going to fry, to global cooling, the crops are going to be all die. So it's hard for them to turn around that quickly. And in the Trump administration, there's a lot less of the propaganda of global warming than what we saw in the Obama administration. And so people are a lot less pushy about the global warming now, and more of the global cooling is coming to light as the reality of it is taking place. I mean, we can see it taking place around the world. You got to acknowledge it at some time.
Yeah, at some point you must acknowledge it. I agree. I think and agree with you that many other governments are well aware of the historical patterns because many of the countries have been around for a long time. So they have, like the bamboo books in Japan, those go back thousands of years. They know of the cold sun and the hot sun phenomena. They've gone through the medieval warm, the Roman warm, the Minoan warm. All of that has happened in their historical documents. They're well aware of warming periods followed. Go ahead.
Just look at what China is doing in South Africa. Look at China's what's doing and they're doing in Kenya with all the railroads and the modifications and the thousands and thousands of miles of track they're laying. The land that the Saudi Arabians the Saudis have purchased in Arizona. What Russia has done with annexing Crimea. The bridge that was just installed with 7,000 pilings from Russia to Crimea. These governments are reacting proactively, like we had talked about on one of the shows with weather modification in China. So this is happening. They do know. They don't speak about it publicly because they don't want to create hysteria and so on and so forth. But the knowledge is global of global cooling. Whether they acknowledge that in the media is a different story.
Yeah, and I find it ironic that the Australian bomb is one of the biggest perpetrators of the global warming scam, second to none from the U.S., so we're the top two, the U.S. and Australia. But back in 2002, the insurance actuaries in Australia came out with a huge document, which we've shared on the show, on the program, about the coming grand solar minimum. And this is a primer for migration, food shortage, global unrest, inflation, all the things that historically have happened. And this is coming from Australia 15 years ago. I don't know if you've saw one of the shows that I share that, but it's like even the government's perpetrating the global warming ruse. They know, but you'll never find out.
Yeah, not anytime soon. I mean, it's going to have to progress until Ray Charles and Stevie Wonder can see it. I mean, it's got to be blatantly obvious before the governments are going to, or before all governments are going to acknowledge it. But slowly, individual governments are coming out. It's like 13, 14 governments, countries around the world that are talking about it openly. And you can find it in their media posts and so on and so forth. So just Google grand solar minimum in government, and you'll start seeing the paperwork and articles coming out.
Listen to Lee, folks. He knows what he's talking about. Now, Lee, this is coming from Max Rockantansky. What happens to nuke plants worldwide, and what will happen in a few years? Most people know of the emergency shutdown, but is there backups for the backups? And he says he used to be a bloke that went in and cut a rope wire to plunge the rods. I don't know what that means. Do you?
Yeah, that's to clean it out. So it depends upon the manufacturer of the nuclear facility as to how the systems are backed up, and it also depends upon the year that it is built. Uh-huh. So if a nuclear facility has 100% manual backup, that is no electronics, that's integrated circuits, computer chips, things of that nature in their monitoring system. So we're talking pre, 1975, 1979 reactors, or later built Russian type reactors. Those will be fine because those can be operated completely manually with no electronics whatsoever. However, more high-tech reactors that are all computer controlled and space age and so on and so forth, if they are not EMP shielded or CME shielded from a thing like a Carrington event, then at those facilities, they can experience problems. How they deal with those problems, that's yet to be seen. But those will be the facilities. So newer facilities will be the ones with the problems.
Very counterintuitive. So what you're telling me, Lee, is that the newer facilities, I was thinking only in terms of grid down for a long period of time. You'd need to keep the cooling going. And you can do that with backup generators, according to you, in the older reactors. But the new ones, which should have better safeguards, those don't have any manual backups? That's crazy.
They do, except for the problem is that those manual backup systems are newer systems, and the fuel injection control modules, the voltage regulation system, the transfer systems, all of that is electronic and computer controlled. And if it's not shielded in a Faraday cage from an EMP or a CME during either of those two events, those electronics will go offline and not be available for the backup. So great, you've got the generator out there if the grid goes online, but the microprocessor in the ECM, the electronic control module, or the FICM, fuel injector control module, the microprocessor inside there will not last through the CME or the EMP. The processor will be smoked. Thus far, during all EMP and CME tests conducted by the government on OEM electronics, every single component, every single one tested, somewhere in that device, there was a catastrophic failure that left that device inoperable. There has yet to be an OEM product that has passed the U.S. government's test of an EMP. So all of these FICMs, all of these electronic control modules, all of those things are toast during a Carrington-type event or an EMP from a nuke in the atmosphere or a EMP-type briefcase from a man-made EMP device.
Yeah, I agree with you. I just had had to replace a FICM on my F-250 because of a short. That was it, and it fries the whole board. So I can only imagine a major EMP that would be fried immediately, and the vehicle just cannot work.
Yeah, it won't even crank in some cases.
Yeah, this is a great segue. It's another part of Max's questions. In regards to the EMP Commission and what they have said, that post 1980 vehicles, they would simply stall and require simply turning the key off and on again to restart the vehicle.
Wrong answer. That is not true. They go out. There is numerous videos. Look up on YouTube, U.S. Army EMP testing. And out at the Yuma Test Center, there's a thing that looks like a keg of beer that hangs up in the air between 4 poles. And they try to drive a car underneath that thing or whatever else and hit the button. And thus far, nothing with an electronic control module inside of it has ever made it to the other side of the square. So, whoever wrote that hasn't seen the testing.
Well, they're called the EMP Commission, so I'll have to look into them, but they sound like they're full of it.
Yeah, it's like the Railroad Commission has nothing to do with railroads. The Texas Railroad Commission.
Is there a way of simply doing a bunker in an urban or suburban area for shielding if you're unable to actually build one? Is there something that exists in those regions that you can use as a bunker, like perhaps the giant 4-foot sewer lines or something?
Well, to protect from EMP, you just really need a metal box that's sealed. And so, you can stick a FICM, your two-way radios, your GPS, or whatever in that metal box. And as long as all edges are bare metal and have a good, tight mechanical seal, so they're touching each other of the bare metal, and it's a conductive metal, as long as there's no gaps in that large enough to stick a business card in anywhere around that, and there you have nice clean surfaces. As soon as that's closed, it's sealed. You're good to go. It's just like you're trying to hide light from getting in it. And so if you can hide light from getting in it, you got it made.
They also make, they're pretty expensive, but these copper spring seals that guarantee EMP proof on your door closures, they're pretty expensive, but I used to use them in the industry for shielding.
Yep. And if you're going to do a true Faraday cage to stop all spectrums, that's what you need. But when you talk about a CME type of event, it's at much lower frequencies as far as the high energy of it. And so the shielding doesn't have to be quite as good as what's required for the standards of a regular, commercial industrial Faraday cage.
Yeah, and I think that we should drive that point home because everything that I've looked into and all the recent statistics and modern analysis, even the largest X-flare, let's go up X-35 that's Earth-facing, the effects on Earth will be much less than an actual EMP weapon, which would be extremely destructive because its purpose is severely to disable.
I would. That's a loaded question and answer.
Explain.
The EMP of a nuclear warhead is going to be regional and have a lot greater effect on handheld electronic devices. The EMP from a flare, CME type of event, would be global and would have a much more significant effect on long pieces of metal. So telephone lines, electric lines, water pipes, bridges, anything that is greater than 30 meters in length will more than likely have a current induced into it for a period of time, thus creating heating and shorting out of things. And so the EMP from the warhead will affect small electronic gadgets, whereas that the CME will take out the grid as well as some of the electronics. Now, again, the EMP would also take out electronics for the grid, so the grid would go down for that. But with the CME, it would take out transformers, generators, all kinds of other things that the EMP wouldn't physically destroy.
Now, just to be redundant, we've talked about this before. Is there a simple way I can wire my house with a fail-safe prior to the box to prevent that EMP CME from entering my house, going through all the wires and frying things plugged in? Is there like a giant fuse that I can put pre-box?
Fuses. Yep. Put the old style fuses in it rather than breakers.
Yeah.
Because they snap immediately, whereas that the breakers take a little bit more to trip, and you'll get some more action in the house before it trips that. So I believe in the old style fuses as opposed to breakers when it comes to EMP CME protection.
We're talking the kinds that look like the bottom of light bulbs that you screw in.
Yeah. Yep. And you can buy them. There's other types of fuses than that. You can also get them so they look like, an oversized firecracker.
Yeah, those two, yes.
Yep.
So how about, can you quickly give us some tips on, are there any modern cars that you can retrofit to work after the EMP? Or should we just go with an older pre-1980 vehicle?
You can go, some vehicles you can go as late as 1988.
Okay.
Depends upon the manufacturer and the model. Everything pre-1980, 79 is it. Like, here on the ranch, we just got 2 1979 tractors, simply for that purpose. Sold the new one and bought 2 old ones. And so, that's the way we're doing everything here is with the older technology. And again, I recommend highly to everyone a windmill for water pumping out of the ground. That is the number one thing you need to have, because during a grand solar minimum and glaciation periods, and by the way, we are already in a glaciation period, people. There is snow on both ends of the planet. And so because there's ice and snow on the poles, we're not actually in a greenhouse environment. We're in an ice house environment. And we're going to continue to progress into that ice house environment. And in an ice house environment, precipitation drops by 80%. I'll say that again. In an ice house environment, during a grand solar minimum type of event, precipitation globally drops by 80%. So rivers that feed LA, California, so on and so forth, forget it. Okay, other rivers that feed other major areas, waterways that have boat traffic on it, forget it. All that's going to go away because precipitation is no longer going to be there. The water supplies and watershed that you currently get water from is not going to be there. And if you don't pump it out of the ground, more than likely, you're not going to have it. So I highly, highly recommend a windmill aero motor out of San Antonio, Texas. I've researched them all. That's the most durable, longest lasting. They've been building them since the 1800s, and there are windmills that were built in the 1800s that are still pumping water today.
Yep. And I even said there's one of those very windmills here in Pagosa that's from the 50s, and it's still pumping water.
Yep. Very easy to repair, very easy to build, the simplest design. It is the epitome of the keep it super simple process.
What is the company again? Can you say it again?
Aero Motor, or Air Motor. And they're in, I believe it's San Antonio, Texas. And you just type in windmill air motor and you'll find it.
Now these are pricey things. Is there a layman's way of building a wind turbine or water-powered generator electrical system using scavenged parts in the future?
I would not, if I were going to pump water out of the ground in the future, I would not depend upon electricity to do that. I would have manual means and what I would do is I would just have a well drilled and then just put a hand pump on it.
Yeah.
Which is much, much cheaper. You can still get the water. You'll get about, depending upon the bore, the stroke, the depth, and so on and so forth of the water, but you'll get anywhere from about a quart to a half a gallon per stroke, depending upon the size of the pump you get.
Yeah, you can get a cast iron pitcher pump. This is the old style long-handled pumps, hand pumps, for $59. And you can pump water as deep as like 130 feet. It just, You have to pump it 50 pumps to get it up to you, and then it continuously flows.
Well, but the great part about that is if you have a good foot valve in the bottom,
Yeah, the new ones have that. So once it's up to you, it stays there. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of them slowly bleed away, but if you use it regularly, you should have water there all the time.
Yep. Or within a few strokes anyway.
Okay, Layman's way of making a telephone communication system when the stuff hits the fan, is that possible?
That's going to be way more expensive than buying some FRS or GMRS or MURS radios and stuffing those in an ammo can that's been modified to be EMP or CME proof. And there's a video on that on the internet, on YouTube, about how to EMP proof or CME proof Faraday cage ammo can. And you just throw the radios in there. You can do that, $50. And by the way, stay away from the Bofang radios by Yaesus or something like that. That's has a mil-spec 810 C, D, and E. If it's not mil-spec 810 C, D, and E and submersible, it's junk. And stay away from
I'd like to talk about a little bit of junk. I went and did a little survey at the local Walmart here on cheap communication devices. I found these Kobe radios that came out this year. They're completely rechargeable, USB only. They don't plug into anything else but a USB, which you can do right off of any panel, solar panel. These little radios were $16. They stay charged all day. They go a mile, crystal clear, and then up to 4 miles you can signal. And this thing costs $20. So you don't tell me, if you're listening out there, that you can't afford some type of major event prepping, because for $20 you can get walkie-talkies that will work. I mean, they're short range and they won't work long, but they're totally useful.
And I recommend, if you're going to do that, have a charging system that can accept 12 volts DC. So if, like you're talking about, it only uses USB, great. Get a USB adapter to your cigarette lighter, and then ta-da, you can just plug it into the 12 volts. Because after all of this, most everything that's going to be lighting or used, or working, is going to be 12 volts.
Indeed.
Designed for car applications.
Some of the questions we got, Lee, I don't even know what they mean. But I'll read one of these examples. This is coming from Doug P. Dear Lee, will the transfer of teratons of water to the poles as ice affects, the ice affect Earth's rotational speed?
I don't believe it will affect the rotational speed enough to change anything that we would notice. And if people talk about it, that happening and creating an earth wobble and all that other stuff, I'm not worried about all that. I'm more worried about the refractivity of that snow and ice and the amount of long wave radiation from the sun that is refracted back out into space from that, and the increased cooling because of that. So, that's more what I'm concerned about as opposed to the orbit. The orbit, it wouldn't make that much of a difference to us anyway, even if it shifted a good bit. Not in our lifetimes, we're not going to see it. But the amount of refraction from all of that snow and ice on the northern and southern latitudes will have a significant effect on our cooling in the future as we progress into that cooling.
Yes, and if guys listening out there, if you don't know the word albedo, you should Google that. So albedo is when things turn white and freeze, like snow and ice. They reflect all of the warming capability of the sun back into space. So those regions that are turning white are rapidly cooling. Not only are they covered in ice, but they're reflecting all the warming rays of the sun back out into space. And simultaneously, as we descend into this grand minimum, our magnetosphere is waning because the poles are shifting. This could add insult to injury, and these are unrelated events. So many of you are asking, are they related? The grand solar minimum is independent. This is the cosmogenic effects of our sun changing the dynamics, which happen on multi-scale cycles. The magnetosphere waning is our Earth changing. Now, this may all be controlled by some external cosmogenic force, but these two things are independent. Do you have anything else to add about the nature of the grand solar minimum and the pole shift and how they're not related, but they are related, Lee?
Well, the fact that the poles are shifting at the same time that we're having a grand solar minimum will in some ways affect how maybe some of the cosmic rays flowing out of the sun will flow into the planet. As far as a significant change to the planet, as far as because we're going through it at the same time we're going through the grand solar minimum, I don't think that it's going to be a significant difference that you can say, oh yeah, this was 5, 10, 15% worse because we had a magnetic pole shift going on at the same time we had a grand solar minimum.
Yeah, it's a rare event when both of them happening simultaneously, because in the geologic record, the periodicity of magnetic excursions is 11,500 years. So the last time this happened was during the Younger Dryas period when sea levels were rising, and that supposed cosmogenic event that caused the entire northern hemisphere to burn occurred. And that could have been caused by plasma discharge events. It could have been caused by groups of meteorites hitting the Laurentide ice sheet. The reality is that it happened, so you don't need to argue it. But we're now in another magnetic excursion during a sea level drop period, because during these glacial periods where we build ice, sea level falls. And it's because of that albedo effect of the reflecting the sun back, driving the temperature drop rapidly. And actually in an interglacial, within 1,000 years, temperature can drop up to 15 C on the planet.
Yes. Most of the time, it can actually happen very rapidly. In fact, you can in some of the historic record, there is significant temperature change in as short as just 3 years. So that, people should not assume that this is going to be a 10, 12, 30, 50-year deal. You can go from an interglacial to a full glacial condition where it's growing rapidly in just 3 years.
Yeah, and we have evidence of that with the mammoths freezing on site, chewing food, and not ever thawing out until now, which is a long time. That's like, 12,000 years of being frozen and never warming up. So it can change on a dime. And I can tell you as a geologist, Lee, that back in the 90s, when we were looking at the Younger Dryas event, we were putting it at an estimate between maybe as little as 100 or 200 years, at the low end 100. And then by the 2000s, they had the Younger Dryas event could be decades, and then more recently, it could have happened in a decade.
Yep.
So these massive temperature changes are we're honing in on the nature of them, and they are rapid. Now, this is coming from Noble Ramzi El Bey. He says, "Dear Lee, how will these solar rays affect things just sitting under the sun while the temperatures are below freezing?" Now, this doesn't mean anything to me, but then he says, "Will metal melt like melting street signs in Mexico?"
I think when he's talking, as far as the metal melting, he's probably talking about a Carrington type event, of which that is possible depending upon what the conductor is and the length of it and its orientation to the magnetic field as it undulates, or the Earth's magnetosphere as it undulates. So long wires, yes, can melt during a Carrington type event. And what was the first part of the question again? I'm sorry.
He wants to know if things will melt under the sun, even though it's cold.
Right. Well, as far as the light changing, there will be differences in the extreme UV. And one of the big studies that is being done right now is the differences in extreme UV and the effects that will have on things like plastics and other things. Because during a grand solar minimum, the extreme UV into the spectrum can increase by as much as 700%. So that's going to be difficult on not only plants and plastics and things of that nature, but also insects that see in that spectrum. It's going to be very difficult for them to navigate during the daytime.
So you remember the X flare last September, Lee?
Yes, sir.
I think it was a 9.8. It produced very little. Go ahead.
Yeah, and we also had a much, much larger one on the other side of the sun that was like an X45 or something.
Yes. Now, the X 9.8 happened also while the spot was turning around the limb, so it absolutely shot like perpendicular to our direction. So it was almost as non-Earth facing as you can get a flare. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it was pretty close, but it was the 45 is the one that sent the tsunami shock wave, and I think it's
back around.
I'm not sure. Yeah, all the way across. You could see it come all the way across the face of the sun, which was totally astounding to me. I'm still flabbergasted by that image every time I think of it. And had that happened, we wouldn't be having this call.
Not at all. And it resulted in a geomagnetic storm getting to KP9. Now, 12 hours before that, I knew it happened, so I immediately went and spent all my money on sugar, coffee, everything. I bought everything I could just in case. And there was very little or effect on the grid. And this listener, Leo Smith, Robert Nestrick is asking if this time an X10 is Earth-facing, what do you think the effects will be? Because I think if that happened facing us last year, well, first of all, let's everyone know that John Casey's stroke happened during the geomagnetic storm after that flare. So the human health effects we know are definite and apparent. But the grid, if that was facing Earth, can you extrapolate, Lee, what would have potentially happened to the grid?
It would have induced you get 1 volt for every 10 kilometers of wire. So if you have a 100-kilometer long wire that's a high voltage transmission line, you'll have 10 volts induced onto that. And what happens is that's a DC current that's induced onto an AC circuit. And it's all trying to pass through the disconnects. It's trying to pass through the generators and backfeed through the generators, go through the transformers and all kinds of things. And it causes lots of problems. And so it will arc across the disconnects, burning those out. It will fry the transformers. It can fry the windings and actually smoke a generator. And all of that will depend upon the duration of the storm, the intensity of the storm, and the positioning of the Earth in the projection of that CME type of event and where that hits on the Earth. And all of those will determine what the effect is. So a prime example is go back and look at the Halloween storm and what it did over in Europe. With the strength of that storm. You also need to keep in mind that the magnetosphere of the planet is decreasing. And as the magnetosphere is diminishing in its strength, the intensity of these storms can be stronger because we have a weaker shield against it. And so as the sun continues to weaken, our magnetosphere will also continue to weaken. And so these storms will have a much greater effect. Now, what you have to keep in mind also is that as the magnetic fields in the sun are going out of phase, if you look at Valentina Zarkova's work, you will see that the sun is continuing to weaken as those fields go out of phase because they cancel each other out. And so the amount of sunspots on the sun will continue to decrease. The problem arises as you get closer to those fields going 180 degrees or exactly 180 degrees out of phase. And because there's 4 fields in the sun and 2 are going out of phase now and 2 are going out of a phase in a few years, you've got 2 times that you have to go through this cycle. And while you're going through this cycle, right before they go 180 degrees out of phase and right after they come out of 180 degrees out of phase, you have areas which are called regions of magnetic instability. And that is where you will see these sunspots flare up and get these massive, nasty CMEs. And that's what created the one that ejected out of the backside of the sun. So, this is the time to worry about this, because this is when it happens, is when these fields go out of phase. So we're coming into it now. We'll go through it and come out. And then in another few years, we'll come into the other two fields going out of phase and then coming back in. So we've got 4 of these that we've got to worry about over the next 10, 15 years.
Yeah, my prediction is sometime 22, 23, we should see the worst of the flaring as we come back up maybe into cycle 25. But we won't know how the sun reacts until we get out of this minimum and see how deep we go. Do you have any thoughts on how long that will last? And if we will see a 25, the mainstream, Dr. Lisa Upton suggests at least a 30% reduction in the intensity of cycle 25 versus 24. So that's the minimum candy-coated estimate currently, 30% reduction.
And she is exactly right. And if you look at and I don't know how her models came to that, because I haven't seen that. All I saw was the product of what she said, the 30%. But I've been saying that for years. And I base that upon when you look at all of the cycles going back. And, people go, well, we've only been looking at sunspots since, 1610. Well, I'm sorry. You can look at beryllium-10 data and go back 200,000 years and see what the sun does. And so when you look at the data going back that far and you look at the rate of decline of solar activity and you match that up to declines into grand solar minimums, there is always a minimum of a 30% decrease per cycle. So no cycle, once it starts, the next cycle is never more than 70% of the previous. So if one is 70, if the first cycle is 100 sunspots, the next cycle will be 70 or 68, and then it'll continue to de-escalate down at a rate of a minimum of a 30% drop-off each time. And then it can bottom out and stay. And I foresee doing that here because, again, we're both the magnetic fields, all 4 fields are going out of phase, and because of that, we're going to lose, that sunspot ability. I mean, you got to have 2,500 to 3,000 gals on the surface of the sun to, of a magnetic field to have a sunspot. And, as the sun's magnetic fields cancel each other out, we won't have that. And all we'll have is these regions of magnetic instability that create these god-awful flares and CMEs.
So when we're looking, now this is an advanced question not coming from a listener, it's from me. When we're looking at the CMIP6 versus the CMIP5, the CMIP6 shows solar cycles that have the same geometry as all of the rest. It just shows the TSI dropping down, but the intensity of the solar max and minimum of each cycle being pretty similar. Whereas when you look at other types of graphical representations, those cycles may not even exist, like cycle 26 may not occur. Do you have thoughts on that? Will we always see a sunspot in a cycle, or like the blank spot during the Maunder, could there be 50, 60 years due to the cancellation of 0 sunspots?
I wouldn't think it would be 50 to 60 years, but 2 cycles is possible. Okay. So we could do 2 cycles, which would be, and when you go into and you study all of the sunspot cycles, as they get weaker, they get longer. Some of them stretch out for as many as like 14 years. And then when you've got long stretches where there's no sunspots at all, who knows how many cycles were in there because nobody saw anything.
Yeah, back during the Dalton Centennial, like cycle 11 was really long, and some of those shorter amplitude, the shorter the amplitude, the fatter the length of time.
Yes, absolutely. So, high amplitudes can be as short as like maybe 10 years, but whereas that one that is below, like say 30 sunspots can be 14 years, or almost 14 years, 13 and a half.
So that means that we're not really going to see minimums for another year or 2, and it could be longer.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where I was really astounded by Leaf's announcement about, the next sunspot cycle is going to start on this date. That
blew my mind.
Cycle, blew me out of the water. I'm like, dude, you've done all this research and you don't know that it's going to be at least, 12 years, 13 years here. So, they get longer, and we've still got time in this one. That's why I keep telling everybody we're far from done. And if it wouldn't be for, NASA redoing how sunspots are counted, the actual number of sunspots on the sun would be like maybe 5 today, and 2 weeks ago would have been 0. There's just nothing there. And when you look at the charts, there's nothing there in the real sunspot number. And if you take what NASA is saying is the sunspot number and divide it by 15, you'll get the sunspot number of what it was back in 1610 for a direct comparison.
All right, let's lighten it up. We got a couple minutes before the break here. We've had a great convo so far. We're almost halfway through, so a lot of people getting their questions answered, and I'm sure they appreciate it. This one's coming from Robin, Real Truth. She says, "Dear Lee, we live in southwestern North Carolina. What do you believe to be the long-term conditions of this area? Thank you so much for helping."
Cold. That area will see, because we have land right outside of Lansing, and so you will see colder, wetter conditions there. And I recommend Ice Age Farmer's map. He has a map on his website. I don't know if you've seen that shows where the planet changes and those atmospheric and weather condition changes during the grand solar minimum. So he's got a map that you can go and look at and see what you'll be getting there, but that'll be cold and wet.
Yeah, I agree. Glacial even. I mean, it's damp. There'll be some mountain glaciers building in the region. The Broad River is a glacial river. Rivers in that region are huge because they're typically in the spring running off with excessive snow. Getting back to the snow and the drought, Lee, I was just explaining this on the channel. The reason that we have all these excessive droughts in the northern hemisphere is because there is 60% more snow water equivalent locked up in the snow still. That's not in the water cycle falling as precipitation. And at each year, that will be the increase and the drought will be worse.
Correct. And if you go into full-blown glaciation, the oceans will drop by about 360 feet.
Indeed, they have every 11,500 years. I don't know why it would be any different. This question's coming from Thomas Bauman. Dear Lee, and this is a sad one to answer, and I'll let you do it. How much and how far will Canada glaciate?
If all of it. I mean, you're going to have snow. You're going to have snow. Look, the last time that we had a grand minimum, what you have to understand is that sometimes all 4 fields go out of phase, and sometimes just 2 fields go out of phase. So last time only 2 fields went out of phase, so it was only half as bad. This time all 4 fields are going out of phase, because last time it was the 206. This time it's the 400-year cycle. But let's look at the 200-year cycle. So if you go back 200 years ago, how cold was it? Well, George Washington got on a horse and with a small contingent of men pulling heavy cannons went across New York Harbor because New York Harbor was frozen solid. Now, how cold does it have to be to freeze New York Harbor solid enough that you can go across it confidently on horseback and cannon? It's got to be really damn cold. So if you can imagine it being that cold in New York City, can you imagine how cold it's going to be in Canada?
Well, the reality is it's really cold, and it continuously, the snow has no time to melt, and that's what builds the glaciers. So it can't be above freezing for that long every season. And that's what allows the glaciers to build, because the snow doesn't have time to completely melt away on the shield. The Canadian shield only has so much soil. It's basically rock that it just starts to build ice. And then it's a wrap because, go ahead, it's snowball Earth. You've got the albedo effect rapidly cooling those regions, and they never warm up.
And the growing season will be basically cut to nothing. And you talk about the albedo effect. What people don't realize is, and it's all coming down to clouds, what people don't realize is if you were to magically snap your fingers and all of the clouds on the planet were to disappear, you would increase the TSI hitting the planet by 30 watts per square meter.
Up. Everything would burn
right.
up.
We would be cooked, okay?
Oh, we're cooked, and we're cooked again. We're going right to commercial. This gives us a bathroom break, Lee. So we'll be back in 5 minutes. Yeah, we'll be back in 5 minutes to talk about burning up if there were no clouds with Lee Wheelbarger. This is the Inconvenient Truth, prepping for the grand solar minimum. Thanks for listening. We'll be right back.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays, midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Join me weekdays for my new show, Tell Chris Joe. It's going to be a problem show brought to you live from Kensington. Thursdays, I'm dealing with hot topics, heated debate, what's new around the world, and ring-ins to discuss listeners' problems and offering considered and heartfelt solutions. So join me, Chris Hart, for Tell Chris Joe. Stop what you're doing, grab a cup of tea. I'm coming live from Kensington. Relax, let me entertain you with a coffee bar online. Listeners' very personal problems. So that's Thursdays, 2 p.m. in the afternoon, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. See you there. It's going to be lots of fun.
This is Barbara DeLong, host of Nightlight Radio, inviting you to join me on a cosmic journey, exploring a metaphysical montage of spiritual material, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between, including spiritual readings for those who seek enlightenment. Let Nightlight provide you with equal measure of light, love and laughter, insight, wisdom, and inspiration. Monday nights, 10 to 12 p.m. Eastern, right here on Studio B, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Good evening, folks, and we're back with the second half of the Inconvenient Truth, prepping for the grand solar minimum with our special guest and plasma physics expert, Lee Wheelbarger. Lee, you're just talking what would happen if there were no clouds on planet Earth. And in fact, you said the TSI would raise, and I responded, yes, and we would all burn up. Take it from there.
So when you look at the fact that clouds are blocking 30 watts of TSI coming from the sun right now, and you say, well, all the anthropogenic warming created by mankind from CO2 is equivalent to 1.5 watts, you realize that the 1.5 is irrelevant when you're talking about 30 from the clouds. So if you have more cosmic rays coming in from the coronal holes we have in the sun, because they're growing immensely. We used to only have coronal holes on the top and bottom of the sun, but as we progress into this grand solar minimum, we get more coronal holes on the equatorial region of the sun, and those coronal hole streams are just spewing out particles, and those particles are coming into our atmosphere through our magnetosphere. They're creating particles as they interact with particles coming in, and they shower in. So imagine each one of these particles as a sparkler, like a child's sparkler that you get at the 4th of July, and you just light it as it starts coming into the atmosphere. And as it flies down through the atmosphere, you see all those sparks rolling off of that sparkler. Those are the interactions that individual particle has with other particles in our atmosphere. And so they create all kinds of unique products as it interacts. So, for example, one of the byproducts of this is the increase or the creation of nitric oxide gas in the atmosphere. Not nitrous oxide like laughing gas, but nitric oxide like a nitroglycerin tablet that you would put under your tongue. And that gas acts like a giant air conditioner in our atmosphere and is cooling parts of our atmosphere. So that's one of the problems. The other problem that you have is that as those highly charged particles interact with particles in our atmosphere, it creates more particles. Those particles steal moisture from already cloud seeds that we have, and as it steals moisture from those rain droplets or cloud droplets, rain droplet nuclei, as it steals that moisture, it lightens their color and increases the volume. So now you're increasing the albedo or the refraction of the sunlight even more. So that is a big problem that we're going to have as we progress into the grand solar minimum, because we're going to have even more cosmic rays rolling in, and because of the increase in aerosols in the atmosphere because of man and ships and aircraft and vehicles and so on and so forth, we're going to have even more of this cloud nucleation following Heinrich Svensmark's work, more albedo effect from those clouds, more refractivity back into space, and ta-da, a cooler planet. So that is actually going to enhance the cooling and accelerate the cooling. And we're starting to see that if you start looking into Earth's temperatures, and, the Atlantic is dropping and all these other, large bodies of water, oceans, and so on and so forth are dropping in their temperatures as well. So what I've been, warning people about for years is going to happen is happening now. And it's going to be, blatantly obviously here very shortly.
And here, I want to make it very clear and explain to the listeners that a lot of global warming alarmists are saying to me, well, yeah, but it's been the solar cycles have been dropping off for the last 3 years, and it's how come it hasn't, or 3 decades, how come hasn't been rapidly cooling? And I'm going to explain why right now. And you explained it, but you didn't point it out. And many of you might know that it is just recently that the modern world has reached a new cosmic ray, a record level. So it's just now, today, this moment, that we are now going to exceed all previous cosmic ray levels. So this day forward, we will see rapid cooling. Not at the beginning of the onset of the cosmic ray increase, which was back on solar cycle 22. It's going to rapidly start increasing now as we see right now record cosmic rays penetrate the entire globe region by region in the next few years to record levels. And they're going to continue to increase for decades. So, and what Lee just told you was that if global warming is only going to be responsible for an increase in TSI of 1.5%, if we increase the cloud cover by 10%, then the cooling effect would be 8 times. That's the grand solar minimum.
Right. And the other part that is going to rapidly accelerate the cooling is we were coming up in the AMO and the PDO as far as the temperature of the Atlantic and the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, and now we've peaked to that, yeah. And now we're shifted down. So when you add, both of those large bodies of water, the AMO, PDO, and so on and so forth, are falling, and then you add into that the increased galactic cosmic rays and cloud nucleation, we're going to start seeing a steep drop-off like you're talking about. Because of both of those, we've already dropped off the edge of the cliff. Now it just accelerates.
Now we're going to get into some weather questions, but first, this comes from one of our top listeners, Camilla from Sweden. She's always commenting and always saying nice things about the channel. She loves you, Lee. She says, it's a simple question. It might be stupid to ask because she's only a broken horse worker, riding instructor, and groom. Well, those are all going to be an important tasks in the future, so you may be at the top of the food chain there.
No. My wife is a thoroughbred racehorse instructor trainer.
Yeah, excellent.
So I'm all for the horses there. Have some here on the ranch.
Where would it be the best place to grow food and the safest place on the planet, according to you, Lee?
Within 30 degrees of the equator.
Yeah, and I would add, and within with at least 200 or 250 miles from a major population center as well.
Yes, to stay away from the major population centers.
Yeah, and you'd be really making your life quite easy, and you might get lucky, and it might not be as bad as we sometimes suggest, but we like the, proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance regardless of anything. There's no way you can predict how it will unfold. So if you have a contingency plan with a contingency plan with a contingency plan for anything, well, then you'll probably doing okay. How do you feel?
Well, I look at it as what happened last time. And when you've got 4 or 5 last times to look at, then that gives you a pretty good idea of what could happen because of the previous history. So you just look at the regions of where it freezes, the regions where it gets dry and it gets wet, and so on and so forth, and then determine which one of those is going to be most applicable for your style of living, and then choose that region and go there. So, we've chosen Florida, and so we're here.
Yeah, and we want the mountains because we like the biodiversity and the views. So we're here, and we're far from people. So, and I say that to everyone. If you believe you're in the right place and you're properly prepared, then that's where you're going to do the best. You're not going to do the best where you feel uncomfortable. So where you're comfortable, where you're prepared, you'll survive and thrive. It's just inevitable. Humans have done it forever that way. Even the ones that are stuck in some of the worst snow and all that were prepared, they loved it. Like we have homesteaders here called the Sparks. They moved into this part of Colorado in 1870. They moved to 9,300 feet when it was like 80 feet of snow and hand sawed all the timber. It's the worst place they could have been. They could have been down in the valley by the river. Now, there were terrible Indians down there that would probably kill them, but it's just where you're comfortable and where you're prepared, you will survive and thrive. Is that how you feel, Lee?
Yeah, absolutely. You have to be familiar with the territory, and then have a plan for how you're going to grow food, and what foods you're going to grow, and things that are going to be tolerant to extreme UV. So like Adirondack potatoes is my number one recommended food to grow, and that's because Adirondack potatoes are known to be able to grow in extremely high altitudes, extremely low temperatures, and extremely high UV content in their light source. So, and they have a deeper, darker, almost bluish, purplish color to them because of that. So, you just have to have everything together and know what you're going to do and how you're going to do it in advance.
Yeah, we have sick UV here. I have 5 varieties of potatoes growing right now. All the purple varieties are exploding, fat, shiny, juicy. The light green varieties, which are the white fingerlings and the white type of potatoes, and even the mountain rose, the pink, which are developed for mountains, they're less, they're just not as vigorous as the blue varieties. I have some Peruvian mountain potatoes, Colorado blue, and they're all like the Adirondacks. I would recommend that too. One of our listeners asked, we grow milo and wheat on 10 acres. What else would you grow? And it would be blue potatoes. They store for a year, and it's just so much food and so simple. You barely need any rain.
And you can also do it there. There's some really unique grow boxes that you can put sawdust and loam type soil in, and just you keep adding the sawdust and the soil to the box, and you can take them up to like 4 feet, and it's a 4x4 box that ends up being 4 feet tall, and on average you'll get 100 pounds of potatoes out of that box.
Yeah, you could do this where you have a little longer growing season, and each time the potato flowers, from what I understand, I've never tried it, but it's after the flower. As soon as it flowers the first time, you mulch it up to the flowers. Is that how you do it? And then you wait for a second flowering? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So we may try that. That just sounds like if you can get more abundance vertically, it's a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you be doing that? And you can find timbers or wood lying around.
And you get some real lumpers out of there. I'm talking stuff bigger than your fist.
I can't wait to try that. All right, let's get to another question. Nick Brown, dear Lee, can you explain, and this is a great question, Lee, a lot of the alarmists, a lot of the skeptics, and a lot of people are on the fence. They always message me like, well, what about the heat wave? And what about this? And this is a great question coming from Nick Brown. He says, Lee, can you explain how the grand solar minimum leads to heat waves and droughts in some regions? Does this go beyond the replacement of the jet stream as we know it, exaggerated with low and high pressure development in the respective latitudes? Have a good one.
I would recommend that you look at Piers Corbin's research on this, and it shows how the jet stream varies and will dip further towards the equatorial regions, and from both the northern and the southern hemispheres. So as far as how all of that is going to change, Piers Corbin is my recommendation for the answer for all of that. And yes, it will dip. There will be dramatic changes in the weather.
Yeah, I agree. And Piers is the number one source because he's actually on our side with global cooling, and his background is weather forecasting. So he has an expertise in weather fronts and movements, and he's been watching it for decades. Definitely go check Piers Corbin out. We're going to try to get him on the show here. We've emailed him, but he's a busy man. And just a shout out to Judith Curry. She emailed us back. She wants to come on after August. She's doing some stuff in Europe, so she can't get on the show. But as far as the jet stream dipping deeper into the equatorial regions and higher up into the Arctic regions, we were just explaining this on the program the other night, that's what leads to the larger hail size. Hail occurs when the temperature differential on these thunderstorm fronts recycle the ice balls back up into the system. You get more recycling if you have a bigger temperature gradient from front to front. So if you're pulling down more Arctic air and pulling up more equatorial air, you're going to get hotter, moist air mixing with colder air, and you're going to get big hail.
And because you have more cosmic rays in there with more particles, and the size of the water particulate in the cloud is smaller. When the hail comes up through, the smaller particulate can adhere to the hailstone faster, and it can also create, how should we say, arrow type or shaped hailstones and odd shaped hailstones, because when you have these smaller particulate, they freeze faster and they'll create these clumps that will clump together and make very strange and odd shaped and large hailstones. So it's
the ones that look like mace heads with the points. Those are because of the cosmic rays. Yeah.
Right.
They're insane.
Right. Yes.
Could you imagine one of those hitting you in the head?
Oh God, no. And that's in the last time we had like grand solar, remember it was the last time, but anyway, the emblem for an arrow meant death, and that's because there used to be these arrows from the sky that would fall. And so people talk about this. I mean, there's, different documentation of hailstones falling from the sky that look like arrows and would cut people and stab people when it would hit them. So that's a danger in the future.
There's no evidence.
Right.
Okay, another question. This coming from Paul Palladino. Dear Lee, from what so far you have observed, what do you think is our timeline going out when disruptions to our way of life are so blatantly plain and obvious and can no longer be denied by even the most accomplished deniers?
Within the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I'll agree with you. I'm going to put 80% on 3 to 5 years with a greater than 50% probability that post-fall of 2019, it could start happening. We'll know more by watching the weather over the year.
If they look right now, they'll see it.
Yeah.
I agree. What I recommend everyone to do is go back and look at all of the artwork from the Little Ice Age. Every time we've went through a grand solar minimum, look at the artwork that was created then. Look at the colors, look at the sun, look at the clouds, look at the sky, the birds, the trees, the people. Look at everything in that and study it in great detail. But pay close attention to what the sun looks like shining through the clouds and how you have the layers of clouds and how very, very, very rarely you will see any blue sky. And if you do see blue sky, there's a little bit of haze to it. And then go outside and start looking at the sky. And if you're over 40 years old, remember what the sky looked like when you were a child. It had this deep blue, rich look to it. When you look at the sky now, you can't see that. When you look at the sky now, there's always somewhat of a light haze to it, unless you're at a really high altitude. And if you look off onto the horizon, you'll see a haze. And that is the increase in the cosmic rays coming in and the increased nucleation. So during periods of where we have increased amounts of particles coming in, it's more prevalent on the sunlight side of the planet than it is at other times. You can actually see it increase the nucleation in hurricanes and thunderstorms and so on and so forth as it's hitting, and the GOES satellites, because of their high resolution, is making it extremely easy to see the effect. You can actually see the waves of it coming in and hitting, and the wave pattern on tops of the storms. And I've been noticing that, in air travel here since 2009, that you can actually see the harmonic patterns in the waves as the cosmic rays are flowing in through those magnetic field lines and inducing that nucleation in the cloud cover.
They look like rollers, ripples, and vortices in the sky even.
Absolutely.
This is a simple one. This is Joan Griffin. I live in central Mississippi. What will I need to prep here?
Oh, my God, move.
Yeah, that's what I would say. I would say you need a helmet. You need a bomb shelter for tornadoes and heavy hail events to go into to keep your family safe. But when you emerge, you're going to have a smashed house. So you're going to have to rebuild. So better get out than stay there. And then the flooding, and you're close to New Madrid. Yeah, is a whole plethora. Can you add anything else? I mean, it's disease. You got mosquito-borne virus.
Yeah, I would move.
Yeah, so I would think moving would be the best bet if you're in central Mississippi. Now, this is a crazy one. I want to read it just to show you how crazy it is. And then if you don't think it's crazy, Lee, please tell me it isn't. I won't say the woman's name. Is there any info on Fukushima's missing reactor core that melted into the earth a few years ago? I'm not a scientist, clearly, but I know enough about nuclear to believe that this reactor may be very near the center of the earth by now. Can you please tell this woman that the nuclear reactor at Fukushima is nowhere near the core of the earth, Lee? And explain why that would be impossible.
Yeah, it would never make it that far. Once you get down through the Earth's crust, farther than 50 miles or so, you get into temperatures that melt rock, which are basically going to do that to the reactor. So it would never, ever make it to the core. So that will continue to melt down. That will continue to be a radioactive hazard for decades to come, if not centuries. I think it's one of the prime examples of letting a corporation be responsible for the safety of millions of people.
Yes.
When you talk about nuclear power and trying to, in that case, keep the genie in the bottle, that needs to be left to an organization of military precision and an unlimited budget. And when you have to deal with a corporation that has to deal with budgetary constraints and board of directors that can vote against things and change policies and how things are dealt with and don't have the international wherewithal of a military type organization, it's a recipe for disaster. And Fukushima is a prime example of that. And one of the reasons that I'm against nuclear power. I've got no problem with nuclear power in an American submarine. I've got a problem with nuclear power that a corporation can say, oh, well, we're not going to follow that regulation anymore, and this thing can blow up and we can, irradiate, a couple million people. So that's, the nuclear reactor is not going to go anywhere but down. And I've paid very, very, very close attention to Fukushima, both during the event and ever since. People that are involved in that, I guess, recovery operation, and then they'll be there for a long time. Yeah, cover up, exactly. When people say, well, nuclear is cheap, and I'm going, well, look at the cost of Fukushima.
Well, had we chose thorium reactors until the military-industrial complex decided on plutonium, we would have been in a safer boat, but we didn't go that route.
Yeah. It's kind of like Tesla with his batteries. He could have chosen a safer route too, but didn't do it.
Yeah, and this is the corporate control on our governments. So Monsanto now controls the food supply. This is the most dangerous chemical company in the universe, and they are responsible for all 80% of seeds on the planet and your processed food ingredients. And they say that it's safe, just like nuclear reactors.
They're not far from the only chemical company on the planet.
I know
they're buying everything.
Big. Well, they own all universities that study bees, so they're really cornering the market on life here, and it's pretty scary.
Yeah.
This comes from Leo Smith. Dear Lee, I live in central Kansas, 30 miles north of Wichita, in a rural area 4 miles from a small town of Newton. My question is, as we descend into the grand solar minimum, what weather changes can I expect in this part of Kansas? I did some research on this and only came up with people moving because of drought. And on a side note, his mother tells him that their grandfathers used to live in a cave in this area, and they were thinking it was to shelter from extreme weather in the early 1800s.
It was. It was to shelter from extreme weather and heat.
Lee, she says there's a whole city in Kansas that's underground.
Right. There's cities all over the world that are underground, and there will be more of them to come.
So this is potentially from extreme heat and drought, and then extreme weather, tornadoes and hail.
Right. And then the unbelievable lightning that we're going to have. I mean,
Yeah.
I've been telling people for years, the lightning is going to become outrageous. Like you've never seen or imagined. Stuff that makes movie scenes of lightning look like child's play. There will be positive lightning strikes that will take out grids, positive lightning strikes that will blow things up. You will see lightning strikes, hear thunder that will, raise the hair on the back of your neck, even if you're 20 miles away. This is all coming, and it's going to be here soon. You're going to start seeing more and more of it every day.
People in regions where these types of lightning occur, in the areas of Australia and some in Africa, they know what to do. They stay inside. They do not leave the structure they're in when any storm front is coming. Because even a buddy of mine told me that he was on some patrol and he watched, they were marching across a field in one of these areas during one of these thunderstorms, and they watched people exploding because they all had metal helmets on and holding guns. People that were in the line were exploding because of the lightning, and then they all ran into the woods.
Right, and the crazy part about it is, that's, lightning when it hits you. Some people explode, some people get cooked. It depends on how it hits you and how it passes through you and, how much sweat's on you. There's all kinds of different variables as to how the lightning will, propagate through your body to the ground. The difference is now we have much stronger positive lightning, which is 10 to 100 times stronger than negative lightning. And this new positive lightning, when it comes down and hits the one guy, it kills him, but it also kills a dozen of his closest friends that are around him at the same time. We're seeing lightning strikes now in India and other countries that are killing 60, 76 people at a time.
Yeah.
So, there's, thunderstorms have killed 200 people in a city in a single day. These are the types of storms that we will see, basically, I don't want to say all over the planet, but a good part of the planet will see these where we already have violent thunderstorms. They will continue to increase, and the devastation from that lightning is going to continue to be astronomical as we continue to progress into this, because as more of these coronal holes are getting larger and more particles are coming in, it's energizing our magnetosphere and ionosphere and atmosphere, and we have to go through a charge differential between space and us. And as we're exchanging those charges, that is part of this lightning. And so we're going to continue to see those, and it's going to be a light show like you've never seen before.
I can't wait. I hope I don't get struck. This is coming from Truth Surfer. Will the temperatures get warmer during the grand solar minimum in Fairbanks, Alaska? There are several theories about this. What's your opinion?
Yes.
Agreed. I agree.
It's not a theory.
Yeah. I know, it's funny. The beginning of our radio show says the opinions here. I'm like, we're about to talk 2 hours about facts.
Right.
So it's not a theory. It was warmer at every other glacial period up in Alaska and in the ice-free corridor, which comes all the way down through northwestern U.S. So that's all the way up through British Columbia. And that doesn't really develop until the glaciers develop. So what happens is this huge ice pack that's up on the Canadian Shield forces the warm Pacific air to circulate there on the coast, causing warm rains and like almost subtropical conditions. And it stays ice-free because of frequent moisture falling down.
Yeah, they're going to love my mosquito killer up there.
And if you want some geologic facts, the Aleutian Island chain just maybe 8,000 years ago, which is during the warm period we're all living in, was tropical. So there's tropical fauna up there 8,000 years ago. So this is also probably, the Aleutians were subtropical all the way up through the Mycenaean warm, which is just 3,000 years ago, which is the peak warm in North America. So the conditions up there were way different.
Oh, yeah.
We'll probably be returning there.
Yeah, you could, at that time, there were tropical plants growing within the Arctic Circle.
Yeah, and it's not that long ago.
Yeah.
So let's get on to another question here. This is coming from one of our Jesus listeners who clearly loves Noah, and they say, what's the most important subject that's overlooked? In your humble opinion, what's the next downward spiral of conditions? Do you have any do-it-yourself plans for arcs? Could I possibly collect a good bit of pallet wood?
Well, I would use a pallet wood for my stove. I would have a windmill for my water. I wouldn't worry about an arc because we're going to have an 80% decrease in precipitation throughout the planet as an average.
Yeah.
You'll have some wetter areas that'll crop up through Kentucky, Ohio, West Virginia, Tennessee Valley areas. They're going up through Virginia, West Virginia, and up into Maryland and Pennsylvania and the Washington, D.C., New York area. That'll be wet and cold. There will be other planets on the area that are like that. But for the vast majority of the planet, there's going to be an 80% reduction in precipitation. And the problem is the ground will be dry, and when the precipitation does come, it'll be in the form of rain bombs. So you'll have deluges where you get rain of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 inches per hour for an hour, 2 hours, 3 days. And it washes everything away. And then guess what? It doesn't rain again for a long time. So
yeah, there's evidence of that all over the Southwest because there's very little erosion. Well, you can go look and see what happened 200 years ago in some of these washes, and it is going to be epic. I mean, we're talking 10 to 100 times more runoff than you've ever seen.
Well, what I tell all my friends to do that live in the Southwest and Texas and so on and so forth, and I say, go find a stream bed, stand in that stream bed, and then walk up to the first tier of land. Then look out on both sides of that stream bed, and you'll see another tier of land.
Yep.
And that tier of land is where your house has to be above. Because when these deluges come, everything in between those two tiers is going to be underwater. And I was telling a friend of mine about that, and he's like, oh, come on, Lee, it ain't going to be like that. And I was like, okay, I'm telling you, this is what's going on. And sure enough, southwest of Austin, it rained out there in the hill country, and I drove down to check out the guy who builds UAV aircraft, surveillance aircraft. I drove down to check on him and his property and his business and everything down there. And we drove down to where the river was. And sure enough, that river was full all the way to that second tier within about 6 inches of flowing over that. And he said, I'll be damned, Lee. And I said, Now, you know why I told you to stay out of there, because this is what's going to happen. That was created from this. It's not like I'm, just go look.
And recently, not too long ago.
Right. 200 years, 400 years.
Yeah, not in your memory or anyone's that lives there, but if you look at it, you could be like, that wasn't too long ago.
Right. And this is a cycle, people. Everybody needs to look at this. This is RC theory from John Casey of how the sun goes through this every 206 years, thereabouts. And so it's worse on the 400-year cycle than it is on the 200-year cycle, but this is a 400-year cycle, so it's going to be as bad as it gets on this one. And this is a really, really bad one when you look at everything that's involved. This should be, it should be horrible, to say the least.
I agree with you. And our first tier off the river here is 5 feet up, and our second tier is another 40 feet up. And that would make the river almost a quarter-mile wide at that point. So luckily our barn is 80 feet up, and that's where we're living. Because water flowed there recently, and I'm a geologist, I know. And there's houses all in that valley. They're all going to wash right by mine.
And that's happening. I mean, they have even more flooding in Wisconsin now. I called my buddy up there earlier in the year. He grows hops and grows corn and grows potatoes and so on and so forth. And at the first part of the year, I asked him how it was going. And he goes, oh, well, the water came up from the river and it came in and it took out my potatoes. But it's all right. I still got my corn and I still got my hops. And so I called him back a few months later. I heard it was flooding up there again. And I said, well, how's it going now? He said, well, I was growing potatoes, I was growing corn, and I was growing hops. But he says, the only thing I can grow now is fish. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, all I got to do is put up an 8-foot fence between here and the river, and I'll probably have 10,000 of them out there. He says, I can't even drive through any of my fields with a tractor. It's up over the axles. He says, so I got nothing. And
well,
so,
and his soil is washing away.
Right. Absolutely. And you can imagine all the trash and debris that's going to be all over that when he gets up. And I was talking to a farmer, because I have farmers call me all the time because of my agricultural background. And,
Fuel oil.
Yeah. But one of the farmers I was talking to that was along the Mississippi, because we were talking about some flooding, there and on the Ohio River, and specifically talking about a piece at a facility, because there's a facility that has some high explosives next to the river, and he was concerned about it because it was next to his property. But one of the old sayings that the farmers along the river have is, if the river ever floods and leaves debris, don't bother picking it up, because it means it's going to come back and wash it all back out again. And so that's their philosophy up there, is if it floods right now, within a year or two, it's going to do it again. So and that's how we got on that topic, was the debris that was in the fields. And he's like, I'm not touching it because it's coming again. That's the old adage here. So, and we know it's coming again. We can see it in the atmospheric compression events and the, cloud nucleation and increased cloud cover and, the increase in cosmic rays. All right, next question, boss.
Yeah, I did a whole study back at Solar Minimum, cycle 2022. I did a study in the Quad Cities. The river was 60 miles wide back in '96. Do you remember that flooding?
Yes.
It was crazy.
Yes.
And so we were allowed in and take photos. It was literally as wide as a state, the river.
Right. I used to work with the American Red Cross, and I did disaster response. And so, all of these large disasters in the United States, even in, other countries, I may have been a part of the response team, or I've supported the response team, and seen all kinds of pictures and had people, on hand and been there firsthand myself. So I've seen this devastation, and, that is nothing compared to what, we're about to see.
Yeah, it's coming.
Yeah.
This is Joe Saladino. He says, Dear Lee, can I have a pony during the Grand Solar Minimum?
I would recommend a horse.
Yeah, or a mule.
Yes.
Okay, Integrity and Karma says, Dear Lee, what do you expect for financial systems failure, recovery, or banking, credit card debt, retirement accounts? How does one protect themselves? Am I just going to have to take the hit of 60% loss to yank my IRA out as it's collapsing, or is there a better way?
I'm not a big financial advisor, but my advice is to invest in things that would be, if you can choose what's in your IRA, invest in things that will be used in, a colder climate. So don't invest in surfboards, but you can surely invest in sunglasses. Don't invest in tennis shorts, but invest in cold weather boots and gloves. My advice to everyone is invest in yourself all that you can, both in physical, tangible assets that you have in tools, seeds, food, beans, bullets, and Band-Aids, and then also invest every opportunity you have in educating yourself with both book knowledge and physical skills by going out and learning the fruits and berries and things that you can eat. One of the things that I always tell everyone is, during the next Grand Solar Minimum, people will starve to death surrounded by things they could have eaten but didn't know. Right. Additionally, people will die because they will eat things that they shouldn't have, or they ate things that they could have, but they just ate it at the wrong time of the year. So, I recommend everyone go out and learn edibles. My wife is an expert on edibles and organics and so on and so forth. And I recommend that everyone learn all of those things so as that they know what they can eat and what they can't eat and when they can eat it and how to prepare those things and practice, go camping, spend time in the woods, learn how to shoot a gun, learn how to reload your own ammo, play with your two-way radios, learn frequencies in your area, find like-minded people in your area. Those are the things that I invest in. And the financial markets, when this hits, there will be drastic losses. But like I said, I would invest if you can control what you're investing in, coal, fuel, things of that nature would be things that I would be putting my monies into. Railroads also, BNSF. CSX is redoing what they're doing, but railroads, Rail America or Genesee, Wyoming, railroads that you can invest in would be a good investment that I would if I were putting money into someone else's industry. Rail would be number one because you're never going to stop the trains.
Yeah, and for most people, they live in populated areas. You just take out 1/3 of your retirement account now. You buy a nice $20,000 RV or bug-out vehicle, a nice $20,000 plot of land far away from everywhere with water, and that's a $40,000 investment in your future. It's not a lot of money, and you're going to lose more than that if you have any amount of money in your retirement account when the financials collapse. So if you already pull that out, it's sitting in your parking lot, and you have the land over there in the Ozarks, you can leave and go there. You have guaranteed your survival because you have a plan. So just like Lee said, invest in yourself. Preparedness plans aren't expensive. A lot of you are like, I don't have $250,000 to buy a ranch. You don't need to buy a ranch. You just need a piece of land to get to with your trailer near other people that are just like you. And then you can build from there. Life is experience. I mean, you got to build from where you go, You don't just sit there.
and it's like we did. We purchased land in North Carolina.
Yeah.
And so all you would have to do is purchase a piece of land, have water running across it. You can do a little hydro there, and then you don't even have to buy an RV. Just buy an old school bus, change the rear end in it, make it 30% higher in the speed of the rear axle on the rear end. So you've got a high-speed vehicle. It's already got a large fuel tank on it, and then just make a badass bug-out bus like we talked about on one of the other shows.
Yeah, and if you didn't hear that, listen to the Badass Bug-Out Bus show. I mean, that was amazing conversation on how you can, for about $10,000 to $15,000, have basically the zombie apocalypse limo that you need to get out and be safe.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move on. Oh, that one is the math question. I don't even know what that means, so let's go on. The guy that asked about the pony, Dear Lee, do you agree that the phase cancellation graphs that Adapt 2030 David Turbine so often shows at the timing of the graphs is closely accurate, and how it shows a distinctly widening gap beginning about now and more extreme weather events that are the result of this widening gap? We already touched on it, but do you want to hit it again?
Well, I think I know the graph that he is speaking about, and I have meant to discuss that with David a few times. I'm not sure everything that he has injected into that graph, so I cannot say that I completely agree with that graph.
Okay.
So I have to leave it at that. And the other question I had before I forget is for Dr. Curry is, I would like to know what effect a 1 nanotesla interplanetary magnetic flux would have on the weather of planet Earth. And if she has any models that could model a 1 nanotesla in a planetary magnetic flux, because I think that's where we're going.
Yeah. Well, okay, another question?
Sure.
DeLorne Krause, Hola Lee. He's from Jalisco, Mexico, and there's a chili pepper. Is copper mesh bound together with fishing line to make a mat a viable protection for our generator?
It would depend upon the size of the holes in the mesh. You're better just to get a real small copper screen, like a mosquito type screen, and use that screen, or have
like a bag. Bag it up completely, yes, and put a twist tie?
Yeah, you could do that, or just put a metal box all the way around it. Now you got to put the screen all even under it, okay? But you got to put because it's got to be grounded, or a metal plate underneath of it, and then have the screen bolted down onto it, and build a hut over top of it, and have it inside of that hut, and then have a metal screen door so that you could get airflow and ventilation through it. That's how I would do it, is I would have everything enclosed in that little generator shed, and have all that be solid metal with a screen all over it, then put a little galvanized roof on top of it, and a screen door that closes with a flap that overlaps. And then, as long as you've got that metal screen and it's all grounded and bound together, then that'll be protected inside there. And when you're not using it, there'll be a transfer disconnect on the outside of that hut, so that the electrical wires going into your house are not acting as an antenna to bring that induced current back into it. So disconnect it from any electrical source or metal connection outside of that hut when it's not in use, or as far as for protection.
Excellent. I have a couple more questions. These are, let's run through them. Ace Truman. Dear Lee, will the plant hardiness zones change? If so, how fast? And what zones will north central Florida be in, say, 5 or 10 years? You want me to take this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, for you listening there, this is what the USDA did over the last 5 decades. Because we were warming, coming out of the Maunder minimum, they changed all the plant hardiness zones, because over a 70-year period, North America had warmed. So the zone you're in, if it's 8, used to be 6. So we're going to go back to the original zones first. And in your lifetime, you should be planting things at least 2 zones lower than where you currently live if you're in North America. And that will guarantee that it will produce at least for 10 years or however long we have as the zones shift. Now, most of the dramatic changes that cause crop loss are going to be due to freak weather, not because of consistently cold weather. And that's what's going to lead the unrest in the beginning. So I think if you just went back to the original zones, 2 zones, you would be good in the near term. Do you have any other thoughts, Lee?
I would say 3 zones for 10 years.
Okay, 3. I agree. And I just buy zone 2 everything and see if it works here, because why not? Why not get the most hardy, like stuff that can survive minus 40 just in case? Because majority of it, 75% of the cold stuff will grow anywhere.
And you got to make sure you got irrigation.
Yeah, watering by hand takes a long time. I've been doing it for 3 years.
Yep.
Okay, here's a good one. Lisa Colbert. Dear Lee, do you or anyone, well, it's just you and me, so I don't know what she's talking about, have any ideas, materials, or inventions that can be used to protect our solar panels, greenhouses, earthships, or tiny homes from hail, high winds, lightning, anything? Granted, 50-pound hailstones will be a challenge.
Yes. Okay, so if you have a solar array or a greenhouse, imagine that you've put that in the back of a dump truck. And then you see on the backs of dump trucks, they have this net thing that comes up and over. It's a pair of bars that's spring-loaded and pulls it up and over and covers the top of the dump truck.
Yeah,
so what you do is, just like a shade screen, but it's a net, and it's thicker, and it's really rugged. So what you do is you have that exact same type of mechanism, But in the middle of it, you have another frame just like the one that has the leading edge. So on one side, you have a roller that rolls it out, and then this U-shaped frame that is attached to the middle of whatever it is that you're trying to protect. That U-shaped frame comes up and over and comes down on the other side, stretching the net up and over whatever you're trying to protect. But what you do is halfway between the end of the frame and the other end of the net, you build another frame. So that when the first frame comes across and hits the ground on the other side, the second net comes up and creates a giant A-frame over top of your solar panels and over top of your greenhouse. It's spring-loaded with a trip. And anytime there's hail, you can just jerk a cord and trigger it, and it'll flip right over, and it covers the whole thing with a net. That's what I designed to protect the solar panels on my yacht from hailstorms.
If you have a small array, I've also seen in this region, let's say, 10 panels or even 20, you build a frame above it on more fence posts, like bigger posts above it, that's a little bigger than the array, and they cover it with like a half-inch galvanized mesh. So because we have such high sun here, it really doesn't block the sun. But if there was anything other than a half-inch hail, it would never hit the panels. It would be deflected away.
Yep. That would work.
It's just a lot of construction, and that's a way to do it permanently, so you don't have to worry about being there to put the net on.
Right.
Also, on our tiny houses, we just built one. So we built the tiny house designed with 18-inch eaves over all of the windows, so the roof extends way past the house, covering the windows from different trajectories of hail. You can also overbuild the roof. Our roof is withstanding 300 pounds per square foot of anything. And you can also use roofing material that will quickly shed, so the angle of your roof can be changed to shed material, and you won't have any collapse issues.
Mm-hmm. That's a great idea.
Anything to add?
No, that's.
Oh, we saved the best for last from Hive Tyrant. We only have 8 minutes left, so we'll talk about that, and then we'll give our little summation if you want. This says, Dear Lee, why hasn't Trump or the government announced anything about this solar minimum? I mean, they already defunded all the global warming nonsense, took it down from the websites. That's clear. That's happened. Now, the current space monitoring branch of the government has the data, even though they're, obfuscating from the truth. There's no way that the powers that be do not know. So why announce a space force instead of solar minimum preparations?
Well, other countries like Russia already has a space force.
Yeah.
Their, entire space program is a military program. And so Trump is trying to do the same thing as they are, as far as having a military force in orbit, just like the Russians have a military force in orbit, and the Chinese are putting a military force in orbit, although the Chinese have a problem keeping their stuff up there. But that's basically what Trump is trying to do as far as the military front and stimulating economic growth through technology and, making space the final frontier, and trying to spur on people like, SpaceX and others to continue into the rocketry deal. And that also includes some of my friends. So, I know what he's doing there. As far as not acknowledging the grand solar minimum, Trump just got in. He's only been in a little over a year, and he's trying to get all this stuff into play here. And it's not something that he wants to address publicly at this particular moment in time. Does he know about the grand solar minimum? I know for a fact that he does. How do I know? Because I know people who are his advisors who have spoken with me, and I know people who have briefed his advisors personally on what's taking place with the grand solar minimum. I also know that John Casey made the White House aware of what was transpiring back when Bush.
But that was
in
Obama.
office.
In 2007, he sent that letter.
Yeah. So Bush.
Yeah, Bush. Sorry.
Yeah, Bush. So Bush knew. Obama knew. So, Trump knows because he's been briefed, and that's why he backed out. Putin knows. So, people around the world know, governments know, they're just not talking about it. But again, the infrastructure push that Trump is doing is a thing that will support what we're getting into. The Space Force will support us in the future because countries that fear you are less likely to attack you. So lots of things are taking place behind the scenes, new technology and some redundancies. And I was, happy to hear that Dr. Scove had said that some of the electric grid systems were, putting additional cutoffs in, like I had recommended years ago for them to do. Thank God they're starting to do it now to help us against a CME type of event. Or even an EMP type of event in some cases. But, all of this stuff is slow because it's government. And a lot of things are going to continue to happen behind the scenes that the general public is not going to hear about. And as per the DHS studies and the effects of notifying the general public in mass as to what's going on and the catastrophic consequences of that, the hysteria that causes from that, and the economic peril that would follow, all of those things are prohibitive to the security and the economic viability of the United States. And so the U.S. is going to be one of the last countries on the planet to announce that we are entering a grand solar minimum and the effects of such a minimum.
Yeah, I agree. Now let's just end up here a few more minutes. What's going on with the geopolitical arena? We got Kim Jong-un visiting China and chumming up with everyone, denuclearizing and just shaking hands and being friends with everyone. What's going on? Is this a setup for some new global battle that was never even thought of before? What's going on, Lee?
No. Kim Jong-un is very aware of the fact that the grand solar minimum is going to devastate his agricultural capabilities. In fact, it already is, and his people are starving worse than they have in a long, long time. On top of that, Trump has played hard to get with this and canceled the meeting when he chummed up to China, and now he's dealing with China because they kind of interfered, so he's smacking them back with the tariffs that he's putting on there, because Kim will do anything he can to stay in power, and he is well aware that if his people continue to starve and it continues to go downhill, his people are only going to take that for so much longer. So he's trying to ensure his viability as a leader in the future while improving the quality of life for the people under him. I mean, you have to understand, people over there believe that he doesn't even go to the bathroom. I mean, it's an unbelievable circumstance that they live in, and what they believe, and the propaganda that they have been fed their entire life. So, it's going to be a culture shock for them to find out that Kim is a mere mortal. And so he's trying to figure out the best way to remain in power and take care of his people and have prosperity and hold on to that for the rest of his life. And he's willing to do whatever it takes to hold on to that. And that's why he's went as far as he has with the denuclearization, the removal of the missile test sites, the agreements, the meetings with China, and so on and so forth. I mean, he knows he's in bad shape, and he has to do something in short order. Otherwise, millions of his people will starve to death.
Awesome assessment, Lee. I would agree with you 100%. Guys listening out there in Radio Land, I hope you got something out of tonight's radio show. We talk about multivariate topics on preparedness and the weather changes that are coming thanks to our universe. Not because of you guys. You had nothing to do with this. But you have everything to do with your preparedness. And Lee gave us many tips, starting off with the hillbilly mosquito trick. I mean, there are lots of ways to survive and thrive in the coming times, and if you don't have a skill set, you need to start now. Don't say I don't have any money. Don't say you don't have enough time. You have to change your lifestyle to survive and thrive in the changing times that we're describing.